This is the first lesson in a big series where I'm teaching the top 25 jazz standards for guitar players. Studying songs on the guitar is critical for our musical development to help us understand the language of harmony, song structure, melodic phrasing, key modulations, chord voicings, and so much more. And jazz standards are some of the most masterfully crafted songs of all time. If you know the jazz standards that I'm going to teach you in this series, you not only will level up your musicianship in general in a big way, you'll be able to play music with anyone else anywhere in the world who plays any amount of jazz, because every jazz player, from student to professional, will know at least a couple of these jazz standards, if not most of them or all of them. If you're interested in playing jazz guitar at all, then I highly recommend that you work through and learn all of these tunes at some point, or at least a handful of them. And these aren't just going to be your average YouTube lessons about learning jazz standards on the guitar. This is a little bit more like a course. Every lesson in this series is highly structured, giving you everything you need to thoroughly learn each of these jazz standards. Every song will be taught in the most common key that it's played in, and I've put them roughly, it's hard to do, but I've roughly put them in the order of harmonic difficulty. So you can start from the beginning, and every tune you learn will make the next one easier. And the beautiful thing about jazz is that once you do the hard work of learning a certain skill on one specific song, you will almost definitely be using that same skill over and over again on every other jazz tune that you ever play. Now, since this is the first video, let me explain a little more about how each lesson in this series is structured, and then we will dive into the first song. Each of the sections of each lesson in this series is like a little lesson of its own. So if you're looking for just one element of how to play a specific song, like if you just want to learn the chords, for example, just use the timestamp links in the description to go straight to the section that you're looking for. So in every lesson, I'll explain why each song in the series is valuable for your musicianship, what each song uniquely offers that makes it worth studying beyond the fact that just a bunch of people know it. I'll teach you the melody with notation and tab on the screen as I demonstrate, showing you exactly where on the fretboard I recommend playing the melody when you're first learning it, and knowing it there really well before learning it in other places. For the chords, I'll demonstrate and show you diagrams of the most common recommended chord shapes, as well as the easiest chords to play, and both of those options sound great. If needed, I'll also explain some of the theory of the chords and how to interpret them. And for some of the tunes, I'll provide comping tips for how to get a great feel when playing the chords. I'll show you exactly what scales you can use to improvise over each of these jazz standards, and this will be a complete overview of what scale every single chord comes from, so you can improvise following the harmony exactly if you want to. But I'll also give you a simplified version of the scale choices where you're allowed to intentionally ignore some of the chords when soloing. This will make it easier to play more freely without overthinking, without having to switch scales as often. And actually, this is something that really serious jazz guitar players do all the time. Plus, I'll demonstrate these scales and show you diagrams of them in the exact spot on the fretboard that I recommend mastering them. By playing your scales in that one spot that I'm going to show you, you can connect together ideas seamlessly while playing. This approach utilizes my own system called the single location improv method, or as I refer to it, SLIM. And if anything is confusing, especially as we talk about theory, don't worry, I have a huge library of lessons dedicated to thoroughly explaining specific concepts, and I'll provide links for those different lessons anytime we briefly touch on a topic or a skill that you might want to go deeper on and learn more about. In each video, I'll share at least one unique insight or exercise for how to truly internalize a song so you feel like you really know it. And that's my favorite stuff to practice, and it really takes things to the next level. I'll even recommend a specific jazz guitar recording to listen to and to absorb for each of these standards. And lastly, at the very end of each video, I'll include a full backing track with me playing the chords, so you can practice the melody and practice improvising over the progression, and even practice the chords and feel like you're really jamming with another guitar player. If you're excited about this series, please leave a comment below and let me know that you're on board. I would love to hear from you, and I'm looking forward to starting this journey with you. Now, let's dive into the first song. This is song number 1 out of the top 25 jazz standards for guitar players, and the song is Autumn Leaves. Autumn Leaves is one of the most widely played jazz standards of all time. It was originally a French song composed by Joseph Cosma in 1945, and in 1949 the American lyricist Johnny Mercer wrote English lyrics to it and titled it Autumn Leaves. It became a huge hit when Nat King Cole recorded it in 1955, and then it launched into the status of jazz standard when Miles Davis and Cannonball Adderley recorded an instrumental version of it on the album called Something Else in 1958. Autumn Leaves has a beautiful, strong thematic melody, but the reason that this tune is one of the first jazz standards that many musicians learn is because of its simple use of both major and minor 2-5-1 progressions. Those 2-5-1 progressions are the common building blocks of jazz harmony, and they're used in almost every other jazz standard that exists. But the Autumn Leaves progression is also special because it uses every chord within a single key, and each chord shifts to the next using the most common harmonic movement that happens in all of jazz harmony. We'll get to the harmony and the chords, but let's start by learning the melody. First, I'll play the melody of Autumn Leaves with tab and notation on the screen so you can see exactly where on the fretboard I recommend first learning how to play this melody. Then I'll give you a few specific tips and things you can practice to make learning the melody and playing the melody much easier on the guitar. This is a great section to come back to and to play along with. You can play along with my demonstration, you can practice along with me, and test yourself after learning the melody. So here's the Autumn Leaves melody on the guitar with tab and notation on the screen for you, played at 130 beats per minute. Let me show you some tips and things you can practice that will help you learn and play the Autumn Leaves melody better. What I'm going to show you next will help immensely with memorizing the melody and understanding the source of the melody. If you're playing melodies without seeing the scale context that the melody comes from, it's like flying blind, and it's so much harder. First, I recommend practicing the scale that the melody comes from. And in Autumn Leaves, in this key, which is the most common key that this tune is played in, you can think of the scale as either B flat major or G natural minor. There are a lot of great ways to practice scales, and I highly recommend being able to play major and minor scales using what I call the root to root method. I've put links in the description to my videos on mapping out the major scale and the natural minor scale using that approach, so check that out if you need to. For right now, I'm just going to give you the physical shapes of the B flat major scale and G natural minor scale. Those are exactly the same thing. They include the same notes. They're physically the same on the fretboard. And I'll give you two ways to practice this. Exercise 1 is just to be able to go up and down the scale in the 5th position like this. Super important side tip for technique. When you're playing a scale or any single note melody, don't ever hold down any fingers that aren't being used. Don't have any fingers down that aren't actually producing a note. So as soon as you play the next note along the string when you're ascending here, you lift up those previous fingers. Exercise number 2 is to break up the scale into what's called a melodic sequence or a scale pattern. This is really difficult to do, but it's one of the best things you can ever do when it comes to practicing scales. It's great to do scale patterns in general, but we specifically want to do a scale pattern on this song because check out the structure of the Autumn Leaves melody again. The A section of the melody itself is a melodic sequence, which means that it's a mini structure within the key that is repeating itself. But each time it repeats itself, it's starting on a different note of the scale. It's an organized, really logical way to break up a scale, and it makes great melodies. The phrase that is repeated in Autumn Leaves is 3 scale notes in a row, then skip up. 1, 2, 3, skip up. 1, 2, 3, skip up. 1, 2, 3, skip up. To make it easier to practice, let's do a sequence that just uses those first 3 notes of the structure, like this. Now, take that 3-note melodic sequence or scale pattern, kind of using those terms synonymously here. Now take that and do it through the entire scale, that whole scale shape that I showed you, and you are then practicing some serious melodic pattern vocabulary. Here's a demonstration of that. At this point, the purpose of doing this is just to solidify our view of the scale on the fretboard. So don't worry about playing it perfectly, playing it smoothly, figuring out all the right fingerings. You can do that later, but for now, we're just mapping it out. And there's a huge benefit to just being able to see the scale with more clarity, with kind of an overview map view, instead of just only seeing what note is next to the note that you're playing. You want to see the whole thing, and breaking it up like this is what does that. After some of that practice, the result will be that when you go back to play the Autumn Leaves melody, you'll be able to see it in the context of that scale structure. And at that point, it will make it a whole lot more easier to remember. It just will make more sense because there's context and logic to why the notes are where they are. This means you're just going to retain it longer, and you won't have to think about it as much when you're playing it, so you can focus on feeling it. If you want to take that exercise to the next level and see the scale with even more clarity, you can do the 4-note sequence that the Autumn Leaves melody itself uses. In this case, you go up 3 scale notes, then jump up a 4th, which means you're going up 3 scale notes, then you're skipping 2 notes of the scale to get to that 4th note. Here's an example of that through the scale. Interesting, huh? I know it didn't sound exactly like the Autumn Leaves melody because the actual melody has a few notes that go outside of the scale, and we will talk about that in the scale section coming up soon. Any melodic pattern you do on any scale you're ever wanting to know better and work on is going to be immensely helpful for clarifying the structure of the scale on the fretboard, and helpful for hearing the scale better, getting it in your ears, and making your improvisations sound more melodic and less like pure scales. For some additional fun scale patterns to practice, check out my video on the top 3 pentatonic scale patterns and my video on triad scale patterns. There are links to both of those in the description. Let's move on to the chords for Autumn Leaves and how to play them on the guitar. All the chords in this series will be taught mostly with movable chord shapes, as opposed to trying to play as many open string chords as possible. The open string chord approach lends itself a little more towards strumming, lends itself a little more towards like doing singer-songwriter style covers of jazz standards, which can be really fun and sound really nice, but these movable chord shapes that we're going to learn are a little better for a jazz playing context. First, I'll demonstrate, and then I'll show you a couple things about the chords that will help you play them and retain them better. I'll play each chord once each time a chord changes, and I'll show you the chord shape diagram on the screen. And this is a great section to come back to and practice along with as you're working on getting the chords down. So here's a demonstration at 160 beats per minute of the easiest chords to play on Autumn Leaves. These are called shell voicings, and they're very useful and very tasty sounding. Here it goes. And here's a demonstration of the most common chord shapes that players use on Autumn Leaves. These chords fill out the sound a little more. This is also at 160 beats per minute. Let's talk about the theory of the autumn leaves chords a little bit and what's happening in the progression. First of all, let's look at how the first 7 chords in the song are all the chords that exist in the whole key. How do we know this? Well, take a look at the roots of those chords and then put them in alphabetical order, and you get the G natural minor scale. We have G, we have A, we have B flat, we have C, we have D, we have E flat, and we have F. That's the G natural minor scale, and Autumn Leaves is in the key of G minor. The 7th chords that are built off of the G natural minor scale are G minor 7, A minor 7 flat 5, B flat major 7, C minor 7, D minor 7, E flat major 7, and F7. And that same order of chord qualities exists through every single natural minor scale. That's why we often refer to them as the 1 chord, the 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, 7 chord, because then you can apply thinking of it that way to any key instead of having to use the letter names, which only apply to one key. Now, maybe you noticed something that was a little off here. I said all the chords in the key. We showed all the chords in Autumn Leaves. In the Autumn Leaves chord progression, we have D7 flat 9 instead of D minor 7. Well, remember when we played the melodic sequence earlier through the whole scale, and it didn't quite sound like the melody when we were going through all the notes in that position? That's because the D7 is a chord that's borrowed from a different scale. It's borrowed from a different scale in order to cause tension so it can lead back to G minor and make the G minor sound like the home bass chord. We call that home bass chord the tonic chord. When playing in minor keys, we often change the 5 chord of the key, which is usually minor, and in this key is D minor 7, and we change it to be a dominant 7 chord instead, which is our D7 flat 9 chord in Autumn Leaves. I know this sounds confusing, but it's actually very logical. It needs to do that to make it sound like it's resolving to the appropriate chord, and it's borrowing from, in this case, the G harmonic minor scale in order to do that. If you want to know more about why and how that works, I have a really good video all about it. It explains everything. It's just called Minor Scale Guitar Chords, or Minor Scale Guitar Chords Lesson is what it's called. And I have a link to that in the description for you if you want to get clarity on all of that. And one more resource for you, because just like we practiced the scale to see the context of the melody better, one of the best things you can ever practice to understand chord progressions better is to practice the chord qualities through various keys. That's how I was able to just say all of the chord qualities through G natural minor. I'm not saying that and then expecting you to remember it. The way you remember it is practicing them through, actually on the fretboard, practicing through keys, playing through those chord qualities. I have a video all about practicing 7th chords through every single key, which is exactly what I originally did to understand what chords go together and how to see those on the fretboard. That lesson is called Guitar 7th Chords Through Every Key. Just says what it is, guitar 7th chords through every key, and there's a link to that in the description for you if you want to work on that. Now, let's talk about the chord structures themselves. Those shell voicings that we played, those are using just the root of the chord, the 3rd of the chord, and the 7th of each of the chords, leaving out the 5th, because most 7th chords have a 1, a 3, a 5, and a 7. The shell voicings are using just 1, 3, and 7. The other chords I played, the fuller ones, those are called drop voicings. It'll pull us way off track to describe those in any further detail right now, but if you want to learn more about drop voicings or shell voicings, there are links in the description to videos dedicated to those topics. But I will say that the drop voicings include the root, they include the 3rd, and they include the 7th like the shell voicings, but they also include the 5th of every chord or a chord extension instead of the 5th. So you can replace the 5th with a chord extension, and a chord extension is labeled as some kind of 9, 11, or 13. There's a link in the description to a video all about extensions as well. And all of these dedicated videos, they really go deep on these things if you need to learn them, because I know we're skating over a lot as we are covering so much in this video. So extensions can be added to any chords anytime. That's why even though I play an F9 chord, which is F7 with a 9, I still just prefer labeling it as F7, because I know you can always add the 9, but you never have to add the 9. Same goes with 13. So I like just saying F7, and I know I can add a 9, I know I can add a 13, instead of labeling it specifically as F9 or F13. In Autumn Leaves, the C minor 7 to F7, without the extension, without that 9 in the F7, that would sound like this. But by adding the 9 to the F7, it keeps the top note the same between those two chords, which sounds like this. It really sounds nice with that common note on top that both chords share. Plus, it's ergonomically easier to play. Now notice that F7 resolves to B flat major 7. That just means F7 is going next to B flat major 7. We say resolves because F7 has some tension in it and B flat major 7 has resolution in it, so it sounds more stable. So notice that the F7 resolves to B flat major 7, and this is a very common resolution. The C minor 7 in the song, the F7 and the B flat major 7, those first three chords in Autumn Leaves, those are the 2, 5, 1 in the key of B flat major. And then in the progression, very soon after that, we have one chord in between, but then it goes to A minor 7 flat 5 to D7 flat 9 to G minor 7. And those chords are the minor 2, 5, 1 in the key of G minor. So we get repeated practice on a major 2, 5, 1 and a minor 2, 5, 1 in this song. You might be wondering, why is there a flat 9 on D7? If a dominant 7 chord is about to resolve to a minor chord instead of a major chord, then the 9 that you can add to that chord is typically a flat 9 instead of a natural 9. The reason is that's because the note that exists in the minor key that the dominant 7th chord is leading to. In other words, you don't need to know exactly how it all works yet because you'll learn that only by practicing and seeing it on the fretboard and doing drills and exercises. But just know it's simply the note that exists in the scale that the chords come from. So anytime we are adding notes, any notes you add are always going to be from the scale. The scale that D7 comes from is G harmonic minor, which we'll practice in the scales segment that's coming up. And in that scale, that note, that flat 9 note is there. So when you add that 9, it's going to come from the scale that the chord comes from. You don't need to see the detail yet, just know that principle in general. And as you practice, you'll see more clarity of it. So here's that D7 flat 9 chord. And here is the G harmonic minor scale that exists closest to it. So here's that lowest note of the D7 chord. It's in the scale, next note of the chord. It's in the scale, next note. There's a shell voicing, and then to get that last note, there it is. All of those notes are just in the scale. One more thing to note here about the D7 flat 9 is that the first time D7 comes up in the song Autumn Leaves, the melody is playing the natural 9 over the D7 chord. So that's the note that is a whole step above the root, a whole step above D, whereas the flat 9 note, that extension, is a half step above the root. So if you're playing the melody there, the first time D7 comes up and you play D7 flat 9, the melody could sound like it's clashing with it. Well, it will sound like it's clashing with it, but that might be okay. You might be okay with that clashing sound. A lot of people just play it that way. If you don't like it, you can avoid playing a 9 altogether on the D7 chord. You could play a shell voicing. You could play a natural 9 that then really lines up with the melody. And that's really just a problem at that one spot. For the most part, people are playing this part of the progression in Autumn Leaves as a dominant 7 flat 9 chord, even during that melody spot. But you can avoid it, and that's normal too. I avoid it the first time in the backing track at the end of the video, just in case you don't like that clashing sound. I play a shell voicing there. The rest of the time, I pretty much treat it as D7 flat 9. Just wanted to let you know about that. If you don't yet fully understand the theory of 7th chords and how they're constructed, check out my video called The Best Theory Explanation of Tertiary Chords for a super thorough theory explanation of that. And if you want to apply that 7th chord theory knowledge to the fretboard and really master seeing those structures on the guitar, practice the exercise from my lesson called Jazzed Chord Shapes Guitar Workout. And all those links, of course, are in the description. Lastly, in terms of the chords, I just want to say that jazz standards often have many different interpretations and versions of the exact same chord progression. So different people will be playing the same song with different chords. Usually these different versions come from people using chord substitutions, which means that the original chord and the substitution chord are serving the same harmonic function in the song. And very often those can exist at the exact same time without causing too much trouble. So if you're playing one version of the chords on the guitar and the bassist is thinking of a different version of the chords in the same progression, it should still work together for the most part. There might be some crunchiness, but that's often totally okay. For example, the turnaround in the 3rd and 4th measures of the 3rd section, the C section of Autumn Leaves, which I have written as G minor 7, C7, F minor 7, and B flat 7, that is often played as G minor 7, G flat 7, F minor 7, E7. Well, G flat 7 is a substitution for C7. and they serve the same function as each other because they share the same third and seventh. The third and the seventh are the two most important notes of a seventh chord in jazz harmony because they determine how the chord functions and where it wants to move to, which is why the third and the seventh are called the guide tones of a chord. B flat 7 and E7 also share the same guide tones and therefore work as substitutions of each other. That's why those two versions of the same turnaround can exist at the same time, and you could even play them over each other and it should sound like it's still working. Another common alteration you will see specifically in Autumn Leaves is that the G minor 7 chord is often played as G minor 6. That main chord that you resolve to is often played as G minor 6, which is this chord. It's a much spicier chord. It has less resolution to it, but it's commonly played that way, and it's kind of considered a hip sound to use that as the tonic chord. I do think it's best first to learn this song with the G minor 7 instead of the G minor 6, and then later on play it with G minor 6 if you like the sound. I have a great video all about the theory of sixth chords in the description if you want to learn more about those. And if you want to know more about swapping chords that have the same function, I'll also link you to my lesson all about functional harmony. I could say a lot more about the chords, but that's a lot already, and I'll provide different tips like this in every single video in this Jazz Standards series, and so much of it applies to every song. So let's move on. Let's talk about the scales you need to improvise over Autumn Leaves. Whatever scales that the chords come from, those are the scales you can use to improvise over a progression. I'll go through chord by chord and I'll tell you what scale each chord comes from, and then I will demonstrate each scale and show you diagrams on the screen within one specific fretboard position that I want you to learn them in and use them in. They all overlap with each other so you can connect your ideas together. Here's the analysis of what scales go with what chords in Autumn Leaves. So here are the Autumn Leaves chords. Before we talk about the scales and the keys that they come from, quick note about the chord symbols. These chords can be written in so many different ways, so just be ready to see them come up written differently. For example, tiny m is minor, so C minor 7. This could be written as M-I-N, and that's more obvious that it's C minor 7. It also could be written with a minus sign. The triangle is major, so B flat major 7. This could be written as a big M instead of the triangle, or M-A-J. That's kind of also obvious that it means major. This one means half diminished, or minor 7 flat 5. Half diminished and minor 7 flat 5 are the exact same chord, just two names for the exact same thing. And one of the ways that can be written is as a circle with a line through it. A circle without a line through it is diminished. So that's why circle with a line through it is half diminished. Here's an example of that half diminished chord being written as minor 7 flat 5. A minor 7 flat 5, exact same chord, exact same structure. So just wanted to point that out. Now let's talk about the keys that these chords come from, because the keys they come from are the scales that we can play to improvise over them. B flat is the key here, and we talked about how these chords all come from one scale. Well, the B flat is the first note of the scale, C is the second note of the scale, D is the third note, E flat is the fourth note, F is the fifth note, G minor is the sixth note, and A is the seventh note of B flat major, the scale. Okay, so therefore this is the one chord of the key. This is the two chord of the key. 5 chord, 2, 5, 1, 4. Okay, 2, 5, 1, 4. Now, so those four right there, you can think of all as just B flat major, the scale. They all come from that scale, so you can just improvise with that. Now, if you just play that scale over, it's going to sound nice. It's going to sound like it works. Is it going to sound quintessentially jazz? Maybe not, because the quintessential jazz sound has a lot to do with your feel and your phrasing and adding chromatic notes and potentially targeting specific chord tones in these. But that's stuff you can think about later. Really, I think the priority is to get used to being able to play over the song as the song with a scale that works, even if it doesn't sound like the jazz you want to play yet, and you can add those details later. And you'll be way better off than trying to sound very, very jazz with some specific lick, but not be able to just play through a whole song. So that's kind of my philosophy there. Now, this is, if we think now yes, this comes from B flat major, so you can play B flat major, the scale over this G, but G is really the home base note here. So, well, you would want to play that exact same scale, but think of G and treat G as the main note. This is called a mode, where you have the same collection of notes for this scale, or the B flat major scale, same collection of notes for this scale, the G natural minor scale, same notes, exact same structure, everything. You're just treating one note as the main note. You're treating G as the main note. And same scale, you're treating B flat as the main note. That's the concept of what a scale mode is. That's all it is. Same notes, different note is the root. Okay, so here you really want to think of it as G minor. So this goes outside of the key of that G natural minor scale or the B flat major scale, as we talked about, and that chord there just has one note that changes, but that one note changing turns the scale this comes from into the G harmonic minor scale. So during this chord, G harmonic minor is the scale that works over it. Okay, that might feel like a lot to be able to switch to it, but it's very worth being able to target the one note that changes there. Eventually, in the long run, we'll talk about being able to improvise over this very soon here in this video. Without needing to do that. That also sounds great. So that's coming up. This chord is, you could call it a pivot chord. Pivot chord means that there's a chord that exists in the previous key and the next key. This is not the exact, maybe perfect example of a pivot chord, but it does exist in B flat. It's the seventh chord in the key of B flat, and it's a chord that exists it's the second chord that exists in the G harmonic minor scale. So you could switch to G harmonic minor for both of these, or you could keep thinking of B flat major, like that, or you could start thinking of G minor and just treat it as the second chord of G natural minor. Any of those things works fine. And then this you want to play G natural minor. So I know that sounds like a mouthful. I know that sounds like a lot. All of this only comes together from really getting in your hands, practicing it on the fretboard, and letting it take time. It's like a language. It doesn't happen in one sitting, one session, or a couple days of practicing to be able to switch to that stuff. But once it clicks, you kind of have it forever. The sensibility of it, it will click, and you can't really take that back. So that's a fun part of working towards the harmony, the sense of harmony changing in jazz. So here we have repeated stuff. So that's all the same. Here we have obviously the B flat major scale again. Here we have this 2-5. Oh, and I didn't mention this is 2-5-1 in G minor. So we have 2-5-1-4 in B flat major, 2-5-1 in G minor, and that's how most people I would say think about it. They think about those two keys happening. So you're getting a 2-5-1 in major, 2-5-1 in minor, just repeated practice on this in this song. You could think of all of this as G minor, all of it, because this is the 4 chord of G minor, this is the 7th chord of G minor, but it's not really functioning that way. It sounds like a major 2-5-1 in a major key. If anything I'm saying here is over your head, don't worry, there's so much tangible stuff here. Grab what you can in this video and use it. Come back later to fill in the gaps. That's totally fine. So everything is repeated now except for these right here are different. This is a 2-5 in the key of F, which means F major scale is the scale that these chords come from, which means you can play that scale there. This is a 2-5 in the key of B flat, E flat, not B flat, the key of E flat. So the E flat major scale is the scale you can use to improvise over this. So yeah, that's some quick switching, and we'll talk soon about how you can ignore those at first, or you can work towards changing those scales in those moments. And this is just repeated stuff here. So those are the scales that we have. B flat major, the scale, G natural minor, which are the same thing. So I'll demonstrate those in a second as the same thing, G harmonic minor, and then F major and E flat major. And I will now demonstrate those on the guitar for you. Here's the B flat major / G natural minor scale on the guitar. And it's the same one that I showed you before, but here it is again. Here's the G harmonic minor scale for that D7 flat 9 chord. Here's the F major scale for that first measure of the turnaround. Here's the E flat major scale for the second measure of the turnaround. So by all means, practice improvising with those scales over the progression, but it takes a lot of work to switch scales on the fly like that while playing. You actually can start improvising over Autumn Leaves way sooner and sound great by simplifying the scale choices. In fact, by just using one scale only. Take a look at those scale diagrams again. We have the main scale of the key. And each of those other 3 scales, they only each have one note that's different from the main scale, which means that during those brief measures that come from other scales, still 6 of the 7 notes that you might play if you just keep playing the main scale are the same notes that you need to play the specific scale that the chord comes from in that moment that you're on. And if you do play that one wrong note, it's not like it's going to sound that bad, especially if you play it and move on. It's a little bit of tension and resolution, just like we talked about with those chords. So if you just play the B flat major scale the whole time, and maybe just try to avoid that F natural note during the D7 flat 9 chord, because during the D7 flat 9 chord, the note is F sharp. So just avoid F natural during that, and just try to play with simple, tasteful phrasing in general, and you'll sound great. It'll work over the tune, and you'll be surprised at how well that works without having to think of all those changing details, which you do want to work on eventually, but I want you to get in and playing real music as soon as possible. Here's an example of improvising over the A section of Autumn Leaves, just using the B flat major scale, not needing to switch scales. Now, what's interesting is if we just add that one different note, the F sharp note that comes from the D7 being outside of the key, if we just add that one note to the B flat major scale, but we don't take away any other notes, we get the B flat major bebop scale, which adds a chromatic note, a note that's outside of the scale, and it sounds like this. Now we have that extra note that's not in the key, but if you use that F sharp as a passing note between other notes, it's going to sound very jazz to do that. It's going to sound great. And if you land on that note, that F sharp note, and target it specifically while the D7 chord is happening, well, then you're outlining the harmony during one of the most crucial moments in the progression. Might sound like this. Just make sure that you don't emphasize or hang out on that extra note, that F sharp note, during any other chord other than the D7 chord, because then it will just sound like a wrong note. Links are in the description to my lesson series on the bebop scale and my 2-part series on how to master improvising with scales over jazz progressions. That's for if you really do want to switch scales at every moment where you need to switch scales. There's drills to do that really work. And if you're ready to specifically target chord changes with chord tones, check out my video about chord tone soloing over this song over Autumn Leaves to get started on that. So in every lesson in this series, I'll give you at least one tip for how to more deeply practice and internalize the song you're working on so you can really feel like you truly know it beyond just the surface level of being able to play it. The first tip that I want to give you in this video is really important. Here's what I recommend. As soon as possible, stop looking at any visual aids. I know that I'm showing you a lot of stuff on the screen, but memorize everything as soon as possible. You will not truly learn what you're working on if you get used to just always looking at diagrams or looking at chord symbols or looking at tab, the melody, the chord progression, the scales, everything. It's fine to learn from visual resources. Of course, you have to learn it somehow, but get away from needing to look at those things while playing as soon as possible, and you will know the song that you're working on so much better. I'll give you my Autumn Leaves jazz guitar listening recommendation in 1 second, but first, in addition to everything I showed you in this lesson, whenever you can, it's really great to work on a solo guitar arrangement of any song that you want to know really well. In a solo guitar arrangement, we're playing the melody, we're playing the bass, we're playing the chords, we're playing everything on one guitar, so it's a complete sound, and it sounds great just on your own, just you by yourself playing the guitar. And I made a simple and really nice solo guitar arrangement of Autumn Leaves. It's inside my free solo guitar arrangement pack, which also includes a bunch of other arrangements, but of course feel free to just grab it for the Autumn Leaves sheet music, which is written out in notation and guitar tab. And you can get that whole solo guitar arrangement pack totally for free. Just use the link in the top of the description or go to soundguitarlessons.com/moon and you can download the PDF. Listening to the songs we want to play is an important thing to do. If you want a jazz guitar listening recommendation for Autumn Leaves, I recommend Jim Hall's live version with the bassist Ron Carter. Make sure you listen to that or listen to any other version of the song that you like while you're working on it. Just make sure you're listening to the song that you're working on. Find something you love, go to that Jim Hall version, find a different one. It's going to help your learning and your playing and your feel and everything by just absorbing that into your ears. And make sure you're subscribed, because I cannot wait to see you in my next lesson, where we will do song number 2 of the top 25 jazz standards for guitar players. Hit that like button and leave a comment to let me know if you liked this lesson. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching. So glad that you're here. Take care and happy practicing.